Hi, and welcome back to COMM1160. This is week 4, video number 2. This video may be a little bit longer because we're going to go through how to construct in-text citations. In our last video, we talked about the difference between direct quoting and paraphrasing. And in your week 4 folder, I've put up a Microsoft Word document that just shows you a sample piece of writing that's using direct quotations and paraphrasing. The paraphrasing is identified in green, and the direct quoting is identified in red, just to give you a bit of an idea of what your writing will look like when you're actually integrating research. So if you read through these two small paragraphs or two small answers, you can see that in the sentences, there are things in brackets. Okay? These are APA in-text citations. So whenever you hear somebody mention in-text citations, they're talking about stuff that appears in brackets within your writing. And in-text citations provide information about where the ideas or the quotation, depending on what you're doing, is coming from. It really is a way of protecting yourself, because what you're doing is you're showing your reader where the original information came from. This protects you against academic dishonesty or plagiarism because you're giving credit to the original authors or the original thinkers of those ideas. But it also protects you as well in terms of being challenged about the information that you're providing. So let's say, for example, you were working with a doctor, you give some information to that doctor, and the doctor questions the authenticity or the reliability of the information. What's in the brackets lets that person know where they can go to take a look at the original, so that they can see it isn't something that you've just made up, that you've pulled out of the sky. Okay, it's actual information that comes from solid research that you've done. So it's very, very important that you include APA in-text citations. They are not optional, okay? They are required. And in your area programs, so whether that's pharmacy tech, whether that's nursing, whether that's massage therapy, any of those healthcare industries, it is going to be expected that the writing that you're doing that's integrating research contains those in-text citations. Okay, if not, if you don't include them, you have just opened yourself up to being accused of academic dishonesty or plagiarism. So very, very important. The thing with doing them is that they are a little complicated at the beginning, but I want to reassure you that just like the references list, direct quoting is really just following a pattern. And it is something that as you use more and more, you'll find comes to you automatically. To make the process simple, though, what I've done is I've created a cheat chart for you that shows how to do in-text citations depending on the situation that you find yourself in. And we need to go over 3 big questions, because as you are deciding how to do an in-text citation, you need to have it clear what situation it is, because in-text citations vary depending on different situations. So there's 3 big questions to ask yourself as you're working sentence by sentence. The first question is, am I direct quoting or am I paraphrasing? And you're either going to be direct quoting, using information word for word, or you'll be paraphrasing, using information and expressing it in your own words. The next question that you need to ask yourself is, how many authors do I have? And you only have 3 possible answers when it comes to APA. You either have 1 author, 2 authors, or 3 or more. Finally, the third question you want to ask yourself is, am I using the author's name in my sentence? Yes or no? Okay, and you may want to write these questions down because they are going to come into play as we learn the different ways to do the in-text citations. So basically it breaks down this way. Depending on your answers and your variation within those answers, you're going to be following different rules. So for example, if I'm paraphrasing and I have two authors and I'm not using the author's names in my sentence, I'm going to follow one pattern. But if I'm, say, direct quoting, have three or more, and I am using those names in my sentence, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Okay, so having your answer, knowing what you're doing according to these three questions helps you identify what pattern it is that you're going to use to construct your in-text citation. Okay, so let's take a look. The cheat chart that I've created for you is really handy because it breaks down all of the different scenarios that you're going to encounter. This is a little dry, okay, so I will warn you, it is a little bit dry to follow, but it is really, really important, okay? So the cheat chart is there for you to download in the week 4 folder, and you can use it as you're constructing your own sentences with in-text citations. I divided the cheat chart into two, okay? So the first part deals with direct quotations, so when you're reproducing word for word for word. And then the second part of the cheat chart identifies what to do when you're paraphrasing. Okay, so that's your first big question. Am I direct quoting or am I paraphrasing? Let's start with direct quoting. So again, remember, when you're direct quoting, you're putting quotation marks around what it is that you're borrowing as you reproduce that information word for word for word. Okay, our first example is when we're direct quoting, we have one author and we're using that author's name in our writing in what I'm going to call a signal phrase. Take a look at the example. According to Smith, bracket, year of publication, close the bracket. I have a comma in there just for grammar. Okay. Then I go into my quotation. Cancer is a very common disease, unquote. Then a space, another bracket, P period space, the actual page number that those words appear on. And then I close the bracket and I put in a period. Okay, so if I'm using the author's name, I'm going to put the year of publication right after that author's name. And then I'm going to put the page number right after the direct quote. But I may decide that I don't want to use the author's name in my sentence. So if I were to say something like, certainly most people would agree that, quote, cancer is a very common disease, unquote, I'm going to have a bracket at the end where I'm going to include all of that information. So I'm going to put the author's last name, comma, space, year of publication, comma, space, P period, space, page number, close the bracket, and then period after that. Okay, so you see the difference between the two? If I'm using the author's name in the sentence, I'm going to put the year of publication right after the author's name, and then I'm going to put the page number right after the direct quotation. But if I'm not using the author's name in my sentence, then I'm going to put everything in a big long bracket at the end. So I'm going to have my author's last name, my comma, my year of publication, my comma, and then my page number. Okay, so easy so far, right? What do we do if we have two authors? Okay, if we have two authors, we're going to do something slightly different. So imagine this time that we have an article or a book written by two people. Their last names are Jones and Wagner. If I'm using their name in my sentence, I'm going to list out both names and I'm going to use AND in between them. Okay, so Jones and Wagner. Then I'm going to put the year of publication right after their names. Then I'm going to go into my quotation. So here's my word for word for word. And then I'm going to put the page number right after the direct quotation. But if I'm not using the author's names in my sentence, I'm going to include everything at the end after the direct quotation. But I'm going to do something slightly different. If it's in the bracket, I'm going to write Jones, my first author's name, then a space, then I'm going to use the ampersand, the N sign, then the second author's name after a space, comma, year of publication, comma, page number, close the bracket, period. Okay, why it's different? Why it's AND in one situation and ampersand in the other situation, I can't explain for you. It's just the APA rule. Okay, that's how they want it done. What are you going to do, though, if you have 3 or more? Well, if you have 3 or more, you're actually going to be able to take a shortcut. So if you have 3 or more, you do not need to list out all of the authors' names. You're going to take a shortcut, and the shortcut is called the et al. Shortcut. Et al. Is Latin for and others. So if I'm going to use the author's name in my sentence, I'm going to put in the first listed author's name, Smith, then et al., E-T space A-L period, which will stand in for all the other authors that are listed. Then the year of publication after the et al. I go into my quotation just like I did before, and then I put the page number right after the quotation. But if I decide that I don't want to use the author's names in my sentence, so, take a look at the difference between the two, I'm going to put everything in a big long bracket at the end, just as I did for 1 and 2, but I'm going to use the et al. Shortcut. So I'm going to put in my first author's name, Smith, et al., E-T space A-L period, comma, space, year of publication, comma, space, P period, space, page number, close the bracket, period. Okay, so you see now how those questions that we were asking come into play. Am I direct quoting? Yes, I'm direct quoting. How many authors do I have? So count your authors. And then determine whether you're using the author's names in your sentence or not. Okay, it's really quite a simple pattern to follow once you get the hang of it. So if this is your first time using APA, remember initially it might seem really confusing and really random, but there is a pattern there. Let's take a look at paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is actually really simple because you're going to follow exactly the same pattern that you did for direct quoting, except you never use a page number. So page numbers are only for when you're giving information word for word for word. If instead you're writing a sentence where you're expressing the idea or the concept that the author or authors have introduced, but you're writing in your own original way, you're paraphrasing, and you're not going to be using the page number, but you will be following the same pattern with the year of publication. Let's take a look at the first example. So for the first example, we're paraphrasing. We have one author, and we're going to use that author's name in a sentence. So I might say something like Fraser, bracket, year, close the bracket, believes that cancer can be cured with radiation treatment alone. Or I might want to vary it. And instead of using the name Fraser in my sentence, I might say something like, one scientist believes that cancer can be cured with radiation treatment alone. Then I would put at the end of my sentence, my author's last name, comma, and then my year of publication, close the bracket, period. If I have 2 authors, I'm going to follow that same rule. So if I'm using the author's names in my sentence, I'm going to put in the first author's name, then AND, then the second author's name, followed by the year of publication. But if I'm not using their name in the sentence, I'm going to put it all in a big long bracket at the end, just as I did before. I'm going to put in the first author's name, space, ampersand, the second author's name, comma, and then the year of publication. Same thing, okay, same rule. If you're paraphrasing for 3 or more, you're going to use that et al. Shortcut. So again, look at the example, McKelvey et al., year of publication, then into the paraphrase. Or if I'm not using the author's name in the sentence, everything in a big long bracket at the end. Okay? I hope I've made that as clear as I can. Where it gets confusing is when you're juggling multiple research sources and you have multiple authors, right, that you're trying to handle. So let's say you write a paper, you have 6 sources of information. You have to keep it straight, okay, where the different information is coming from. So again, if we go back to my example, that sample piece, right, you can see that the information in the brackets varies depending on where I'm getting that information. Finally, the last thing that I want to cover is how you handle citations within citations. So sometimes you'll be looking at a research source and they are using APA themselves. So they are either direct quoting or paraphrasing other authors. Okay. This gets a little more, a little more complicated. The APA manual, right, says that you should try where possible to get the original work and look at the original work. But if you can't get it, okay, you're going to use what they call an indirect in-text reference, okay, or an indirect in-text citation. What you're going to do is you're going to only include an entry for the source that you have in hand in your references list. But when you're doing the in-text references, you're going to credit the original source, and then you're going to add the words as cited in, okay, to show that you've quoted a secondary source rather than the original. Okay, sounds confusing, but it's actually quite simple to do. Take a look at the example, okay? So let's say that I have a book or an article that's written by Jones in 2005. And in Jones's work, Jones refers to somebody called Smith. Okay, so they have their own brackets. Jones has their own brackets where they're citing Smith for some information. I want to use that point. Okay, so I'm going to reference the original thinker, okay, or researcher with that idea, Smith, 2001, and I'm getting that from the bracket that I see in my Jones work, asserts that dopamine causes hyperactivity. Okay, then I'm going to say, as cited in Jones, comma, then the year of publication. Okay, so I always use the earliest one as my original, and then I say where I saw it. So I actually saw what Smith had to say in Jones, and Jones published in 2005. Okay, that's just an extra wrinkle, I guess, to make things a little more complicated as you're working. Okay, we've covered the cheat chart. I am going to recommend to you that you print out the cheat chart because you are going to be using it. We're going to be doing some exercises in the next video, but it also is going to be useful to have handy as you're doing your own original writing and also as you're going to be doing the APA number 2 assignment. So while I hate to kill trees, I do think it is handy to have this on paper so that you can look at the situation, look at the example, and then follow the model as you're doing your own writing. Okay, I will talk to you in our next video. You're going to need some scrap paper and a pen to work through the exercises that we're going to do. I'll talk to you in our next video.